remakes. For some, it is the possibility of playing classics without acquiring old hardware. For others, nostalgia, as sometimes these games don't age as they should. And it is undeniable that we have seen a lot of them in these years. And sometimes a good remake helps to fix issues of the past, or simply bring back one of those games to be loved by new generations. In this video I wanna share 10 RPGs that I would like to see once again. Some of these games are quite popular, some others, well, what can I say, they are more on a whim. But hey, it is always good to dream a bit. I guess that for the popular games there is little to no debate. But let me know, which RPG would you like to see remade? Without further ado, let's begin. The first game I would like to see as a remake is Shin Megami Tensei 1. Because this is a game that had a completely different approach for its time, and let's be honest, while its narrative is still holding, its gameplay is on the clunky side. I enjoy first-person dungeon crawlers, but this one is quite dated, and I don't think many people want to use pen and paper while diving into its huge mess. The other route would be emulation and patch, but hey, to me these are good enough reasons to want to see this game remade. In short, this is a game that definitely deserves to be brought back. While I would like to keep the DRPG elements, I understand that for most people they are not particularly appealing, so if Atlus takes the SMT4 or 5 approach with third person, I wouldn't mind, to be honest. It would be interesting to see what kind of world was originally envisioned, because for the graphics we had back then, many things had to be imagined. In the next spot I will throw Xenogears. This one is an absolute classic that had some issues here and there, but if there is something that could be improved, it's the execution of what we received in the second disc, because let's be honest, it left a bad taste after all the previous events. Aside from that, while it could be quite controversial, as pretty much everything these days, it had a mature story, throwing a lot of philosophical questions in every corner. And that is perhaps my only fear these days, because if everything has to be re-scripted to be politically correct, I don't wanna see this game suffer that, or get a crappy localization as several games these days, because Xenogears was the game that questioned a lot of things in a deep and meaningful way, but also portraying a harsh reality with a powerful figures, and all of that has to be left as it was, harsh and true to its narrative. As for the gameplay department, yep, that could also help a lot this game, because there were some frustrating moments, so yeah, 2D HD remake would definitely do wonders with this one. Once I am talking about Squaresoft, another classic that definitely needs a remake is Chrono Trigger. There are several opinions with this one, and as always a huge group that says that the game is perfect as it is. And yeah, I agree, but I would like to experience a 2D HD version of this game. Because let's face it, being able to see the whole vision of the world they tried to show would be fantastic. Particularly a moment that impressed me a lot was the future. It left a huge impression in my childhood, that I gotta be honest, I would like to see that crude reality in HD. Another thing that needs a good update, it's the music. Don't get me wrong, I still love to hear this OST from time to time, but increasing its quality would definitely be amazing. As for the gameplay, I still believe it is extraordinary and enjoyable even in this day, so that is the part I understand when a lot of people say that it has to be kept as it is. So yeah, please don't throw a flashy thing and keep it turn-based. The next entry would be a group of games, rather than just one, because it is the Heaven and Earth saga. With the actual trilogy I would be more than happy, as we will get to play Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia and Terranigma once again. And similarly as the previous entries, this group of games have an extraordinary story, not just its surface, but also a lot in the subtext of the narrative. And contrary to some of the opinions I've seen, I would like to see their gameplay improved, as these games had the narrative and music, but their gameplay nowadays feels a bit aged and clunky. But without a doubt, this is another group of games that would be extraordinary to play, as they are really short action RPGs, so combining the whole journey, it would take like 50 hours to finish. So having a 2D HD or even a solid 3D world would be fantastic. For the next game, I would pretty much leave it up in the air. If you have followed this channel for a while, you know that I am a fan of the Castlevania series, and games that I would definitely play once again are any of the DS entries. However, what I have to add here is that they need a deep change in their exploration levels. Probably Dawn of Sorrow not so much, but it would be cool nonetheless. As for Order of Ecclesia and Portrait of Ruin, Unfortunately, their level design falls into something really linear until you reach the second half of the game or get into Dracula's castle, so I would prefer these games to show a deep Metroidvania approach, dive into its roots with Symphony of the Night, and completely remade those levels for us to enjoy once again. So then again, a 2D HD approach would be fantastic. While I like the 3D Castlevania games, there is a level of complexity that I prefer to see in a side-scrolling adventure, rather than 3D. And of course, updating their OSTs would be terrific. Yuzo Koshiro and Michiru Yamane always deliver extraordinary OSTs, and whenever I hear the rearrangements of some of their works, I fall in love with those games once again. Unfortunately, this is more like a dream because, knowing Konami, I prefer not to say anything. Another group of games I would like to see are the first Fire Emblem games, the ones we didn't get in the West, but if I had to choose particularly one, it would be Thracia 776. This is a game that had a lot of interesting executions, because unlike new releases, this is a story that portrays a much more realistic war with of course the fantasy setting of Fire Emblem, where you are pretty much escaping rather than seizing, and there are some forgotten mechanics as capturing enemies. Of course, this was a double-edged sword, but Thracia was amazing on that front, because you never get that much gold, so understanding when to capture and steal takes some time. This also led to see this game as hard, but it is because it wanted you to be strategic, rather than brute forcing your way. So a remake of this game could help for those who didn't have the chance to play the originals or had to emulate, but also revive the roots of the franchise. The next game would be Parasite Eve. This is the child of Final Fantasy and Resident Evil. I mean, it had a good story and many atmospheric moments filled with tension, and I am still impressed by its scenes. But once I start playing it, something doesn't feel right. Back in those days, oof, these games were magnificent. I still enjoy the original Resident Evil, I mean comparing the kind of gameplay it had. But Parasite Eve hasn't aged that well, as there are many moments that can be a bit frustrating. Slow movement, confusing areas where the fights actually take place, and sometimes scenes that need a little ambience. So yeah, why don't teach new generations that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, by remaking this game? Then again, I would like to keep it all its original RPG elements. They were actually good. Perhaps what has to be worked is the general length of the game, because Parasite Eve was really short. In the next entry, I will throw Pandora's Tower. This game had mixed reviews. Some people say it is a classic, some others say that it was overhyped. So you be the judge. This action RPG had an extraordinary story, quite depressive and filled with spiral loops into sadder moments, but a really good story nonetheless. However, its gameplay could receive a bit of help, as it was kind of mixed between dating, puzzle solving, and the mentioned ARPG. Some people didn't understand Elena. Some said that the puzzles were nerve-wracking, as you need to understand them to beat the towers and bosses. Some didn't particularly like the combat, but I will say it is more about balancing these things, or bring it as pure as it is, and let the players sort themselves between like it or hate it. To me, this is another game that I would like to see with polished mechanics and graphics, because it had a lot to show, so a second chance would be cool. The Legend of Heroes is coming to an end after 20 years, and Trails in the Sky is nowhere to be seen with a needed update. But hold a moment, what about Dragon Slayer? Or the I have no idea how to pronounce trilogy? Well, they are not linked to each other, and back in those days all of them had the title The Legend of Heroes in their bots. So, Trails in the Sky. One thing is looking at something like a super summary, and another get to play the actual game and tell for yourself if it was worth it or not. But this one comes more on a whim, because I still consider it still holds its charm. You know, the kind of game with perfectly balanced OST that you can enjoy. Extraordinary character development, one close to reality. While some things could be debatable with classic tropes, it is still really solid. However, I would like to play this game as the newer releases in the series. I like the isometric scenes, the funny character sprites, and many of those details, but once closing the series, I would like to play this game in a needed remake to finally close the curtain and begin a new chapter. And last but not least, Once again a group of games. 7 Dragon. We got the third entry, and it is understandable without playing the old games, but this is a game that had several references left behind, that I consider worth giving them a try in the West. It had the classic approach with classes as in Wizardry, but of course it has its own charm. These games had their own issues that definitely would benefit a lot from a remake, and of course having them all together. Because if you are just going to remake one and leave the other two behind, I prefer that you don't even try. And I hope you know what I'm talking about between lines. But yeah, 7 Dragon had interesting mechanics and level progression. If you know about code BFD, the other games are rather similar on some ends. While it would be a long story, I consider worth diving into it. Those are some of the games I would like to see remade. There is a huge number of them. We could go into the 80s and 90s throwing several games. But between nostalgia and whim, this is my list. What would be yours? I hope you found this video informative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.